Hello and welcome to this week's Tennessee Bar Association Legislative Podcast. I am Brad Lampley. You will notice that I'm not joined for now by Berkley Schwarz and Ashley Harbin, my two partners in crime. And that is because we've had to do a little bit of creative editing. So thanks to our producer, Hank Elliott, for helping out with this. We had some late breaking news as we were recording this earlier, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. So we're going to go back, and in the interest of being right and trying to have as complete of information as we can for you, we're going to address the breaking news first, and then at that point, we'll return back to our, as I'll call it, our regularly scheduled programming for discussion of all other things related to Tennessee politics. But obviously, it's been an exciting time, a lot going on. Legislative session wrapped up last Thursday night at about 8:15, and since then there's been just a flurry of activity on a number of fronts. But what happened in terms of when we were cutting the podcast at the moment is we had just had some late breaking news about a few things. President Trump had tweeted out that he had just gotten off the phone with Governor Lee and talked about the desire to redraw Tennessee's congressional districts to make the entire state completely red, all 9 congressional districts. And that was on the heels of Marsha Blackburn, who right now figures to be a strong favorite to be the next governor of Tennessee. And we'll get to that later on. But because Marsha had already tweeted out herself that she was committed to making Tennessee's congressional delegation completely across the board, red all the way across the board. And so you might be asking, okay, so what's precipitated all this? Well, it's been really an interesting week. On Wednesday, the United States Supreme Court issued an opinion in the case of Louisiana versus Calais. And in that case, it dealt with the Voting Rights Act and specifically the way Louisiana's they've got I think 2 congressional districts that are primarily drawn up, I think, based on the racial composition of the districts. I think the decision was that the second one, as Justice Alito said, was an unconstitutional gerrymander because he said the Louisiana, in drawing up the district, relied too heavily on race. He went on to say that allowing race to play a part in any government decision is a departure from constitutional rules. And so you are now, I think, in the wake of this case, in the wake of this opinion, limited to cases of intentional discrimination. So I think that's the standard, at least going forward. So, and look, a lot of the folks in the judiciary that listen to the podcast, hopefully you'll reach out and correct me on that if I'm wrong, because we're very much in a period of a fog of war. So there's still a lot of unclear things going on, and hopefully you'll extend some grace in that regard. But that's really, I think, the bottom line takeaway from what's, I believe, about a 40-page opinion. So that's the latest on that. What had happened is you overlay that in the context of what was going on. We already had a congressional arms race with the margins in Washington being so razor thin right now between Republicans and Democrats having control of the House of Representatives. Every seat matters. It truly does. And so for that reason, you'll recall that Texas started this process earlier on where they were going to look at trying to redistrict some districts to add a few more Republican seats. Virginia has done something recently. You've got other states. I think Illinois has threatened to do it, the other way around. I think California is doing the same thing. Mississippi, their governor, Tate Reeves, last Friday, I believe, called for a special session to see if they could redraw some districts to add on some seats. And then in the wake of the decision in Louisiana versus Calais, the governor of Louisiana, Jeff Landry, he announced that what he was going to do was stop all voting on that congressional race, on all congressional races in Louisiana, to give them time to process what had happened. And, of course, that's what led to where we are in Tennessee. So, again, a lot of pressure, I think, from the White House to make the red states somewhat redder, and that's what's going on now with every seat meaning a lot. But there's a lot of news coming in. I think a lot of different states are trying to process what happens. And so how does that impact what happens in Tennessee? Well, it's simple right now. The district right now, Tennessee currently has 1 Democratic district, and that is in Memphis, and it's currently occupied by Steve Cohen, the 9th Congressional District. Steve Cohen, by the way, was going to have a really tough race, which we'll get to in a little bit, of his own on his own party, with Justin Pearson coming in. I think is a very compelling candidate. But now I think with the Republican interest in trying to redraw that district, and those of us that live in Nashville and experienced this a few years ago, where Nashville was essentially cut into 3 different parts and put in with other predominantly red districts to make Nashville lose its Democratic district. You've got the potential of the same thing going on in Memphis. Has there been a special session announced yet? As of this moment, not yet. I think we'll probably see that might get announced over the weekend if it happens. There are a lot of reasons, obviously, to do it, a lot of pressure to do it. There are a lot of reasons not to, by the way. Don't forget the fact that you've got a lot of logistics. We're past the filing deadline. At the state level, the entire state House and half the Senate is running for election or re-election. And so legislators cannot raise money when session's going on. Obviously, if session's going on here, some sort of a special session in Nashville, that means that they're not going to be back home pressing the flesh, knocking on doors, and trying to assure their own re-election chances. So you've got a whole lot of things going on at once. It's fascinating political theater. But with all of this, the fate of the U.S. Congress could potentially hang in the balance. And so that's why there's so much pressure going on in the various states. So, again, that's how it is in Tennessee right now. And things are changing at the moment. Again, the fog of war certainly applies to where we are right now. But that's a little bit why this final legislative podcast, for the moment, if we have a special session, you might see us again. But that's why we're having a little different, me starting out solo. But now we'll go and talk about the rest of the session and the part that we cut earlier today. So we now resume your regularly scheduled programming. Thanks. And really, to cap off what I think heading into the day, before all the tweets started flying about redrawing lines and special sessions and so forth, I think one of the things we were going to talk about really is these congressional races looking ahead, because now that the Tennessee legislature has adjourned, and I know we'll get to that momentarily, but you have some really fascinating races. And I think the one at the top of the list was that 9th congressional district race between Steve Cohen, who is in his 70s, taking on young upstart, see him on CNN all the time, Justin Pearson, who used to actually, as I understand it, be an intern for Cohen. And now he's just decided that it's time for fresh ideas. And so in the minds of a lot of folks down in Memphis, that is going to be a really interesting race. Talked to one person that's really involved in Memphis area politics, has been a long supporter of Congressman Cohen forever. I mean, donor, just really hardcore in his corner. I mean, Cohen was his guy, and he told me the other day he has flipped his support to go for Justin Pearson. So if there are a lot of other people out there like that, that could be a really compelling race. But now that seat might go to a Republican. We'll have to see. But that's the fog of war we're in as we speak.
That's exactly right. So if you've been following everything with, TBA Today and all the articles that we've been running, and as we mentioned earlier, the Tennessee General Assembly adjourned for the year last week. So we do have an update about, the different bills that passed, what happened. We've talked a lot about the budget. That is one of the major things that, the General Assembly has to pass before. It's constitutionally required that they pass it before adjourning. So we've gone through that a lot. I think there were several other big issues, though, that were addressed through conference reports, because the House and the Senate passed different versions of the bills. So they had to come together at the last minute and just kind of decide, and then have what was going to happen, and then have that pass both sides. So I know some of that was healthcare related, and I don't know if y'all want to go through any of that or hit the high points.
Yeah, I think too on that. I mean, Ashley was very involved in the CON legislation, and Ashley, might be good for you to talk about that. I know that's of interest to a lot of folks, and you were involved in that one, and so might be a good time.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at it. So, and we do get a lot of questions about CON. This has been a hot topic for I don't know how many years now.
What does CON stand for people who aren't familiar?
Certificate of Need.
Okay.
So the goal, and this actually came from from Washington, right? So Senator Marsha Blackburn worked with the president's office on the Rural Health Transformation Fund and giving monies back to the state. And one of those criteria for a state getting more money was addressing the kind of the red tape, the barrier for access to care, access to healthcare. So there was a lot of momentum about passing a bill that would do away with certificate of need. The governor came out and stated this in his State of the State address. And then both the House Speaker and Lieutenant Governor got behind this. So it did not do away with all CON, but what they ultimately came down to, and there were a lot of amendments floating around. I think it got up to 11 or 12 at one point on one bill. So what is going to be pulled out of certificate of need is so acute care will stay in until 2030, and then it'll come out, and then cardiac cath centers and freestanding ERs will stay in and come out until in 2028. So you have two different dates, and that really was the crux of the disagreement. Is the Senate passed the version where all three would stay in until 2030. The House really wanted cardiac caths and the freestanding ERs to come out in 2028. That's ultimately what they agreed on.
Okay. Thank you, Ashley. That's really
Yes.
helpful. And I know there were other bills that passed dealing with foreign wire transfer tax, which I know that you were also involved in. And but talking, putting a tax on foreign money transfers, and it restricted it to non-business or person. What I can't remember. Do you know the?
So they took out banks.
That's what it
So they left in peer-to-peer transactions. So think about vendors like PayPal, Venmo, Stripe, which is strictly just business, right? So Stripe is no peer-to-peer, it's just business transactions. So the banks got lucky, but all these other money apps that we tend to use on our phones stayed in the bill, and they're going to be caught under the bill language. So,
Right. Which, will be interesting because they'll pass that, obviously, the tax on to the consumers. So, we'll see how that goes. A lot of immigration bills that pass, dealing with everything from like staying in Tennessee 90 days after a final deportation order. You could be, arrested and charged with a misdemeanor. It's mandatory ICE cooperation now that every county sheriff has to enter in an agreement with ICE. And noncompliance can lead to loss of state funding, public benefits, about state and local agencies, verifying immigration status, and more and more and more. So it sounds like a lot of I think the proponents of these bills were just saying, we're trying as a state to implement the federal laws that already exist, on immigration and that sort of thing. So they, we're supposed to be done. And so no more bills. It's funny. Somebody asked me the other day, I got an email about a new bill being introduced. And I was like, no, that is not happening. This is done. We're done. But, we talked a lot about the Education Freedom Act with the vouchers, and everything from, and then, like I said, then now we're discussing the upcoming elections, how that looks, what's happening with that. Right now, we've got a lot of local elections going on for judges and different things. And then we'll have in August the primary, which will be the big election, and then November, the general. So, it's kind of a crazy time, especially with all of this happening right now. And I don't know, Brad, you have anything else you want to mention?
I think one other issue to keep in mind is as we go into the off season is the AI legislation. There was a lot of that. There was a lot of controversy about that down the stretch. And we had several bills ranging from one to just try to put stronger protections on kids to another one about having chatbots, AI chatbots assisting people in committing suicide. So, you have a lot of that legislation, and the challenge there, you've got the tech companies on one side of it saying, look, this is how we're protecting kids and protecting people, and we're not doing any of that. But then on the other side, you've got that just intrinsic desire to protect kids from this emerging technology. So, we're really at the inflection point of both of those right now. So that'll be interesting to see how that works out in the off season. At the end of the day, everything was essentially sent to a study committee. There were a couple things that, got through, but essentially it's really an issue that's going to be studied this off season and going forward. And that'll be something really interesting to keep your eye on. One of the issues there, and this was pointed out in a Wall Street Journal article over the weekend, the White House has gotten involved in some of those state level legislative initiatives that try to call different states, including Tennessee was on the list as identified in the article, to say, look, we don't want this right now. We'd like to prefer to have more of a national solution. The challenge at the Tennessee one that we went through, and there were some really, I think, inflammatory accusations on the floor about maybe the other side was lying or maybe lobbyists were lying. I think one of the challenge in these in these types of situations, this legislation, is that both sides really felt like they had the permission of the Supreme Court to do what they were doing. The people against the legislation thought, okay, the White House is opposed to this. The people for it thought that the White House was for it. And so, when you think you have the White House on your particular side of an issue, then that obviously causes problems, because it's like, okay, what is there a right hand, left hand thing? We don't know. And so that'll get cleared out too. Again, another situation where there's fog of war. So AI will be another situation where we've got to watch a lot in the off season, in addition to everything else, because you've got a bunch of interesting, state level races. You got legislators that aren't coming back. You're going to have a new governor. Gosh, I wish there was something going on this off season, Berkley.
Right. And that's what I was about to say. I mean, you've got so none of the U.S. Supreme Court decision does not affect the state offices, state legislature, but all of the House offices are up, right? And I think half the Senate. Yeah. And so, so right now it's just campaign, for everybody. And that's what we shift to. And, these legislators, they cannot campaign. It's blackout season when the legislature is in session. So as soon as it adjourns, everything opens up. So that's why they try to get out a little earlier, usually on election years like this. So we'll be following all that. It'll be interesting, like you said, with some of the retirements and different things going on there.
And I want to be clear on something I mentioned earlier, because I want to be, and maybe Hank could do some creative editing on the back end of this. Again, we're talking about the fog of war. But looking more into terms of the Louisiana versus Calais decision, it did not formally ban majority minority districts. What it did say, though, and I'm reading now Justice Alito in the majority opinion, he said because the Voting Rights Act did not require Louisiana to create an additional majority minority district, in other words, a second majority minority district, no compelling interest justified the state's use of rights. So those of you that are constitutional scholars are going to have a field day with all this. It said, Alito went on to say that map is an unconstitutional gerrymander as it currently exists. And so that's really going to be fascinating. Can we have a majority minority district? That'll be interesting to figure out, and where you draw the line. And I think there's a little bit of threading of needles, as we like to say there. So
exactly. I think there's been a lot of argument saying that now everything has to be race neutral. I don't know that it has to be. I think if there's an argument that it's not, then they can challenge it.
And to that point too, Berkley, like most things that we see, you read 3 different articles by 3 different news sources or perspectives, and they all, are saying different things. So it's I think we'd have to parse the opinion a little bit. So for those of you watching right now, it's saying that's not what that held, shows hopefully you can extend some grace to us, and then we'll try to get it straightened out by the time we're back at the convention in June, because I'm sure we'll
that's right. We definitely will. And so just to let everybody know, so this is our last podcast for this year, for 2026. We will pick right back up in 2027 you know what? I just said that because I was going to say that, but if there's a special session,
we might have to
it
go
may
back
not
and
be
correct
our
everything
last.
we've been falsely reporting. I'm not sure.
So scratch that, and I'll say that we may see you again. We will, keep up with TBA today, and they'll tell you if we have a new podcast. I think if you follow our podcast too, it notifies you when we drop a new one. But if there's a special session, we'll absolutely be back and talk about that. But absent a special session, then we'll be back in 2027. And except when we do our annual big legislative update CLE at the convention, which we invite everyone to attend. It's in Knoxville this year, and it'll be so fun always. And it's a great time to network, great place to be. And then finally, also, we record it, so it's available on the TBA CLE.
You can watch it on New Year's Eve. Every year we get people texting us going, "Now that's funny. You wish us a happy New Year. How did you know to watch this on New Year's Eve?" Yeah,
I know.
time to watch that with a glass of wine.
That's right, of course. And you should definitely watch it. Don't just turn it on and walk away. It's worth watching.
So we have talked a little bit about as we wrap up, a few things that I have on my mind. One is the final session for Governor Lee. Lieutenant Governor McNally. You've got a lot of folks in the General Assembly that aren't coming back. Johnny Garrett, Mary Littleton, Jerome Moon, and the list goes on and on. Caleb Hemmer. We've just got a long list of people that are that we're used to having around, and a lot of supporters of TBA that are not coming back next year. And that happens. I mean, every couple of years you get people to say, look, it's my time to ride off into the sunset. Maybe they'll decide to run for another job. I believe that the Jerome Moon is running for mayor of Blount County. Ron Travis is running for mayor of Ray County. And so, you've got that type of thing going on. And then you just get others that just want to spend more time with their families. Johnny Garrett running for Congress in that race against Van Hillary, which will be a fascinating race in the seat currently occupied by John Rose in the 6th district. So, and that'll be, speaking of compelling races, that'll be a compelling race too. So there's a lot of
governor's election too, right? Because you've got John Rose running against Senator Blackburn and others. And that'll be very interesting.
Yeah.
So
that's because that race in particular is going to be fascinating because, you got Johnny who's young. He's young in terms of, he hadn't been in Congress. He hadn't been in DC very often. He's sort of a fresh face in that lane of traffic, but he's been around the legislature a long time, had a very accomplished career. He's a lawyer as well. And then running against Van Hillary, who at a time, I think a lot of people, I guess in early 2000s thought he was a really strong candidate for governor. Van used to be in Congress. He has served as John Rose's chief of staff until very recently. So that is a compelling race where you've got really sort of an up and coming emerging name in Johnny Garrett against somebody that's really a household name in that district in Van Hillary. The fifth is the one that interests me, Berkley, because you've got Andy Ogles, who has always he's been there for, I guess he's in his 3rd term now. And of course, in Congress, you're constantly running, right? But he's in his 3rd term now. But he's always one that you feel like from either media reports or financial reports or something like that. There's always people that view him as one of the more vulnerable candidates out there, and yet they're always trying. There are always people that are going after him from a standpoint of a compelling challenger in the primary. And so far, they have not been able to succeed. Part of the reason is because Andy is really popular in Murray County. And that is a district that goes really big in Murray County, a little smaller in Williamson. And then, you've got a little bit of a fraction in Nashville. And so if you run what I would call a Nashville Republican against him, they're going to really be challenged in that race. Well, now he's got a tough primary challenge in Charlie Hatcher, who's from Williamson County, former agriculture commissioner. We'll see, Charlie's got some, I think, very well-heeled supporters. We'll see what happens with that race. But then if he even wins that, and we'll see what happens there, who wins the primary. The general could get real interesting because you've got Chaz Mulder, the mayor of Columbia, who's a Democrat, who's got a lot of crossover appeal. So that could get really interesting, especially in a district that's so heavily favored in favor of Murray County. So I don't know. 5th will be one interesting one to keep your eye on when we're not watching what in the world is going to happen in the 9th between Cohen and Pearson and whatever happens with potential redrawing in the lines there. So who knows?
Yes. Exactly. So yeah, it will be interesting to see how this all plays out for sure. So I think we've covered the breaking news and
We're feeling the best we can. I feel a little bit like a weatherman when we've got we're two weather folks with tornadoes coming through, and it's like, man, I hope we're just right on some of this.
right.
Aren't you here?
Yeah, and things are constantly changing, and with the nature of the news right now, everybody hears about everything changing immediately. So things could have changed right when we were talking. And by the time goes out on Friday, who knows? So,
which Friday, by the way, will be Happy Derby Eve for those of you watching on Friday.
For those of you celebrating.
For those of you celebrating, growing up in Louisville, the schools were closed on Derby Eve. So everybody could get ready for the biggest day of the year, the Kentucky Derby, the first Saturday in May. And Berkley, I know you're really interested. I know you noticed I've got my Keeneland vest on today.
I see it. Are you going to go to the Derby?
I'm going to sit at home and watch it and try to
drink a mint julep. Yeah.
Have a mint julep. Try to find a way to bet on it. But I do have, for those of you that are so inclined to maybe make some pool selections and try to maybe put a little fun money on it, I do have what I think could end up being your top 3 to win the race if you're interested.
We are interested. Tell us, Brad.
I figured you were. I will say, so it is, I think the winner is going to be a horse named Further Ado. So keep that in mind. I need that for parties. I look at horses the way Ed Lanquist looks at bourbon selections. So, so Further Ado.
Okay.
Number 2, a lot of people like Chief Wallaby. So keep that name in mind. And then the third is going to be between Golden Tempo and Right to Party. Okay. So I think what I would do is maybe toss those in, just throw those names around. People will think you're a degenerate gambler, you have a problem, or you've been hanging out at the racetrack too much, and all that's happened is you just followed our podcast.
Or maybe they'll be really impressed, and maybe you'll, make a lot of money. So
those horses, because I picked the Berkley, those horses will all come in dead last, and I'll look like an idiot. And that's okay too, because that's horse racing.
That's right. Well, I have a friend who's going, and so I wrote down exactly what you said. I'm going to let her know immediately, and then she will hold you accountable.
Yeah, that's right. She will.
That's exciting. Well, we might have to address this about how they did at our CLE since
we should.
Yeah, I can't wait. Or do a whole TBA Today article on it. Let's see. Right. We'll see.
Right.
If
we haven't been run out of town by all the haters that are saying we had all this wrong to begin with.
We misinterpreted that.
We misinterpreted the Louisiana Kelly opinion.
Right. Yes.
While reading the news articles for the first time 10 minutes ago.
While talking.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you to everyone who has listened to us. We appreciate it. We appreciate your support through this legislative session. And we enjoy doing this. It's a great way to let everybody know what's going on. It's hard to kind of get way in the details about everything as we go, but I think it's a nice way to be able to update people in real time. And so we are very glad the session is over. We'll see if there's a special session, but thanks for sticking in there with us, and we appreciate it. And we will see you either soon in the special session or next year in 2027. All right. Thank you. Bye.
See you, everybody.